In the heart of a bustling park, where children laugh and joggers pass by, a simple moment of serenity takes a sharp turn. Dwayne Johnson, casually dressed in a hoodie and sunglasses, sits quietly on a bench, blending into the peaceful scene. But peace is short-lived. A stern voice cuts through the calm. Officer Kane, a man with a history of profiling, steps into view. His gaze narrows as he sizes up Dwayne, and an air of tension suddenly grips the park. What begins as a quiet afternoon soon spirals into a clash of prejudice, power, and an unforgettable showdown. It was a picturesque afternoon in the park. Families gathered under the sun, children's laughter echoing through the air as they chased bubbles and played tag. Joggers passed by with rhythmic steps, and the occasional bark of a dog added to the cheerful symphony. Amidst it all, Dwayne Johnson sat on a weathered bench, his hoodie drawn over his head and sunglasses shielding his eyes. He was just another figure in the crowd, seeking a moment of calm away from the chaos of the world. But the park's tranquility was about to be shattered. Officer Kane, a man infamous in the area for his prejudice-fueled arrogance, strolled through the park. His uniform gleamed in the sunlight, and his demeanor carried an air of unchecked authority. As his gaze swept the park, it landed on Dwayne. A flicker of disdain crossed Kane's face, his mind already making assumptions about the man on the bench. With every step toward Dwayne, Kane's presence felt heavier, more imposing. Children's laughter faded into the background as he approached. The tension in the air thickened, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave the entire park stunned. Officer Kane's polished boots crunched on the gravel path as he approached, exuding a sense of unearned authority. His eyes fixated on Dwayne Johnson, who remained seated on the park bench, calm and collected. Kane's expression was a mix of arrogance and disdain, his body language screaming overconfidence. To Kane, this was just another situation where his badge gave him the upper hand. "What are you doing here?" Kane demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. He loomed over Dwayne, who sat unmoving, his posture relaxed yet dignified. "You don't belong here." Dwayne tilted his head slightly, his sunglasses reflecting Kane's rigid stance. "I'm just enjoying the park," he replied evenly, his deep voice steady and composed. "Am I breaking any laws?" Kane scoffed, his face twisting in irritation. He wasn't used to being questioned. "People like you think you can sit around and do whatever you want," Kane sneered, his tone dismissive and laced with prejudice. The air around them seemed to thicken. Nearby joggers slowed, sensing the tension. Parents called their children closer, while a few curious onlookers began to linger at a distance. Kane stepped closer, his hand resting ominously on the baton hanging from his belt. "I'm not going to tell you again. Get up and leave. Now." Dwayne remained unmoved, his presence calm yet unshakable. "With all due respect, officer," he said, his voice unwavering, "I have every right to be here, just like everyone else." Kane's face flushed with anger. His authority was being questioned in front of an audience, and it was clear he didn't like it. "Don't test me, boy," he spat, his voice dripping with condescension. Dwayne leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. He didn't raise his voice or change his tone, but his words carried undeniable weight. "You're making a mistake, officer." The confrontation reached a boiling point. Kane's frustration boiled over, and the lines were drawn. What had begun as a routine patrol for Kane had now escalated into a moment of undeniable tension. The park, once filled with laughter, now stood still, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The situation took a darker turn as Kane's patience snapped. His jaw tightened, and his hand gripped the baton on his belt with a force that turned his knuckles white. The park seemed to hold its breath as he stepped even closer to Dwayne, the distance between them now mere inches. "You think you're better than me?" Kane hissed, his voice low but seething with venom. "I told you to leave." Dwayne didn't flinch. His calm, steady gaze seemed to pierce through Kane's bravado, further fueling the officer's rage. "I'm not going anywhere," Dwayne said, his voice measured but firm. Kane's face contorted with anger. Without warning, he yanked his baton from his belt and swung it with brutal force. The hard, metallic crack echoed through the park as the baton struck Dwayne squarely on the back. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The sound of phones being pulled out and cameras being activated filled the air. Murmurs of disbelief and outrage began to spread among the crowd. "Is he serious? Did he just hit him?" someone whispered. "Get that on video," another voice urged. Dwayne's broad shoulders stiffened momentarily from the impact, but he didn't cry out or recoil. Slowly, deliberately, he rose to his full height, towering over Kane. His imposing frame seemed to cast a shadow over the officer, and the crowd fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Kane took an involuntary step back, his confidence faltering as he realized the sheer magnitude of the man standing before him. Dwayne's expression was calm, yet there was an undeniable intensity in his eyes. "Big mistake," Dwayne said, his voice low but powerful enough to make the hair on the back of Kane's neck stand on end. The crowd, now fully engaged, watched in awe. Some began shouting, demanding accountability. "That's assault," one man yelled. Kane's face turned red, both from anger and the realization that he was now being recorded from multiple angles. His hand trembled as he gripped the baton, but the power dynamic had shifted. Dwayne took a small step forward, his eyes locked onto Kane's. "You can hit me again," he said quietly, "but I won't back down. Not today." The park, once filled with carefree laughter, had become the stage for a confrontation that no one would forget. Kane's authority was unraveling in front of an audience that now saw him for what he truly was. The air in the park crackled with a mix of tension and anticipation as Dwayne Johnson, no longer seated, stood tall and resolute. His calm demeanor had shifted, still controlled, but now commanding. He was no longer just a passive bystander enduring Kane's aggression, he was a force to be reckoned with. Dwayne's stance was solid, his broad shoulders squared, and his penetrating gaze locked on Officer Kane. The man who had swung the baton moments ago now appeared smaller, even as he stood mere feet away. Every movement Dwayne made was deliberate, exuding quiet power and confidence. "Back down, officer," Dwayne said firmly, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority. But Kane, blinded by his own arrogance and wounded pride, sneered at the warning. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he taunted, gripping the baton tighter. "You're just another nobody trying to play tough." The crowd murmured, growing restless. People edged closer, their phones capturing every second of the escalating scene. Whispers of admiration for Dwayne began to ripple through the onlookers. Kane raised the baton again, his movements erratic and fueled by frustration. He swung with force, aiming to strike Dwayne once more. But this time, Dwayne was ready. With lightning-fast reflexes, he intercepted the baton mid-swing, his massive hand closing around it with ease. For a moment, the park fell silent. Kane struggled to pull the weapon free, but Dwayne's grip was unyielding. With an effortless flick of his wrist, Dwayne wrenched the baton from Kane's grasp and tossed it aside, where it landed harmlessly on the grass. The crowd erupted into cheers. "That's what I'm talking about," someone shouted. "Show him who's boss," another voice added. Dwayne didn't revel in the moment. He raised a hand, motioning for the crowd to quiet down, his focus never wavering from Kane. "Officer," Dwayne said, his voice calm yet firm, "this can end right here. You don't want to take this further." Kane's face twisted with rage, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The cheers of the crowd, the cameras recording his every move, and the towering figure before him were all chipping away at his confidence. Still, his pride refused to let him back down. "Don't lecture me," Kane spat. "You're just making it worse for yourself." Dwayne's restraint was remarkable. Despite being provoked, belittled, and assaulted, he refused to escalate the situation. His words, his stance, and his unwavering gaze all reflected a strength that didn't require violence to assert itself. "Last warning, officer," Dwayne said quietly, his tone carrying a finality that made even the crowd hold its breath. The stage was set for a final confrontation, but Dwayne's message was clear: he wasn't going to back down, and he wasn't going to stoop to Kane's level. Kane, now stripped of his baton and his authority visibly unraveling, couldn't hide the fury that consumed him. His humiliation was on full display, his pride wounded in front of the growing crowd. The chants and cheers of the onlookers only added fuel to the fire. "Don't you dare think this is over," Kane barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his frustration. Driven by rage and desperation, Kane lunged at Dwayne with reckless abandon, his fists clenched and his face contorted in anger. The crowd gasped as the officer charged forward, his movements wild and uncoordinated. But Dwayne was prepared. Years of discipline and training had honed his reflexes to perfection. With a swift sidestep, he avoided Kane's attack, his movements precise and calculated. As Kane stumbled forward, Dwayne used his momentum against him, hooking a leg around Kane's ankle and sweeping him off his feet. Kane went down hard, landing face first in the grass with a muffled grunt. A mix of laughter and cheers erupted from the crowd. "That's what he gets," someone yelled. Others cheered louder, their phones capturing every humiliating second of Kane's fall from power. Dwayne stood over the fallen officer, his posture unshaken and his expression calm. He didn't gloat, nor did he lash out. Instead, he simply looked down at Kane and said, "This ends here." The crowd roared in agreement, their voices drowning out Kane's incoherent muttering as he struggled to push himself up. For the first time, Kane looked truly vulnerable, his uniform and badge offering him no protection from the judgment of the crowd. Within moments, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the noise. Police backup arrived, their vehicles pulling up to the edge of the park. Several officers stepped out, their faces a mix of confusion and concern as they surveyed the scene. The crowd didn't hesitate. Dozens of witnesses stepped forward, their phones held high as they played back the footage they had recorded. "He attacked that man for no reason," a woman exclaimed, holding her phone toward one of the arriving officers. "He swung first," another voice chimed in. "We all saw it." The evidence was overwhelming. Kane's abuse of power was undeniable, laid bare by the videos and the testimony of the crowd. One of the officers approached Dwayne, who had stepped back to allow the situation to de-escalate. "Are you okay, sir?" the officer asked, his tone respectful. Dwayne nodded. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady. "But you might want to check on your colleague. He's the one who lost control." Kane, now sitting on the ground with grass stains on his uniform and dirt smudged across his face, looked up at the crowd and the officers surrounding him. The arrogance that had defined him moments ago was gone, replaced by a mix of fear and humiliation. The backup officers exchanged glances before one of them stepped forward to address Kane. "We'll need to review the footage and take statements," he said, his tone professional but firm. "Hand over your badge and weapon for now." The crowd cheered once more, their voices filled with triumph. Justice had been served, not through violence, but through restraint, discipline, and the unwavering strength of a man who refused to be broken. As the officers led Kane away, Dwayne turned to the crowd, offering a small nod of gratitude. The moment was over, but its impact would linger, a powerful reminder of the strength that comes from standing tall in the face of injustice. As Kane was led away by his fellow officers, his head hung low, the once brazen arrogance drained from his demeanor. The crowd watched in silence as the man who had wielded power so recklessly was now subdued, his actions exposed for all to see. The park, once filled with tension, now carried an air of relief and reflection. Several onlookers turned their attention back to Dwayne. Applause broke out, starting with a few individuals and quickly spreading through the crowd. Some approached him, expressing their gratitude for standing up not only for himself, but for what was right. "Thank you," a woman said, her voice filled with emotion. "You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for all of us." Dwayne, towering over the crowd yet exuding humility, raised his hand to quiet the applause. He stepped forward, his deep voice commanding attention but carrying a warmth that drew everyone in. "This isn't about me," Dwayne began, his gaze sweeping across the diverse faces before him. "This is about all of us. It's about ending the hate and prejudice that divide us." The crowd listened intently, their earlier cheers replaced by thoughtful silence. Today wasn't just a moment of standing up to one person's actions. It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a better world, Dwayne continued. Unity isn't just a word, it's a choice. It's the decision to look at someone and see a fellow human being, not their skin color, their background, or their beliefs. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, and heads nodded as Dwayne's words resonated. We can't let fear or hatred define us, he added, his tone steady yet impassioned. We've seen too much of that already. But change starts here, with moments like these. With people willing to say, enough. Dwayne's message landed like a call to arms, but not one of violence. It was a call for courage, compassion, and unity. For a moment, the park felt like a space of transformation, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, hope could prevail. The crowd began to disperse, many still reflecting on what they had witnessed. Some shared their own experiences with the person next to them, while others resolved to take the inspiration of the moment into their daily lives. As Dwayne prepared to leave, a young boy approached him hesitantly. "You're a real hero," the boy said softly, his eyes wide with admiration. Dwayne smiled and crouched down to meet the boy's gaze. "You can be a hero, too," he replied. "Every time you choose kindness, every time you stand up for what's right, you're making a difference." The boy beamed, and Dwayne stood, giving a final nod to the crowd before walking away. He didn't see himself as a hero, but he knew that the moment would ripple far beyond the park that day. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the park returned to its usual calm, but the memory of what had transpired lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Dwayne's actions and words had left an indelible mark, a reminder that courage and compassion could stand tall against hatred and injustice. This story isn't just about a man confronting prejudice, it's about the power we all hold to make a difference. Racism, bias, and division have no place in our society. But confronting them takes more than just moments of bravery. It requires a collective effort to foster understanding, empathy, and change. The lesson is clear: silence in the face of injustice only allows it to grow. But when one person stands up, they can inspire countless others to do the same. To those watching, let this serve as a call to action. Share this story. Start conversations about equality, justice, and unity within your communities. Small actions, when multiplied, can create ripples of change that grow into a tide of transformation. Together, we can create a world where everyone belongs, a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The question is simple: will you take a stand?